Hello, my name is Vito Quaglia, and this is a matter of principle. Today, our guest is Joby Fawcett, a person who's covered high school sports in northeastern Pennsylvania for his entire career, and more importantly, has celebrated and promoted high school student athletes in the region. With his interview and storytelling skills, he has shared the wins and losses, success and failures of thousands of athletes and coaches from all over NEPA. And we can't wait to hear his story and what he's going to provide some insight to. So welcome to the podcast, Joby Fawcett.
Thank you very much, Vito. How are you today?
Doing all right. Doing okay. Can't wait. This is something I want. We've talked about things over the years, but I couldn't wait to have this interview. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So in case there is anybody out there who's listening to this that doesn't know about Joby Fawcett, could you just give our listeners just a brief little, introduction, a little summary of the Joby story, where, how it started for you and how you wound up where you're at right now?
Sure. So, you will remember I'm a 1988 graduate of Lakeland, where I played football and ran track and field. And then I went on to play football at Lafayette College for 2 seasons, then was injured, twice tearing my ACL in my left knee, and that cut my career short at Lafayette. And then I graduated in 1992 with a degree in government and law. Hard to believe, right? And then when I returned home after graduation, to make a long story a little bit short, but a little bit more clear. So my mom was diagnosed with lupus in 1979. And at that time, it was really not a great diagnosis. There were not a lot of really good treatments. And she somehow fought and battled and survived much longer than the doctors had anticipated. But my final year in college, of course, they kind of had mapped out it was going to probably be her final year living. And so she did make graduation, and I had come home after graduation, and she did pass in July of that year. And because I was home, I took it kind of hard and everything, like most people would at that age. And so I just started kind of doing little odd jobs. I coached football and track at both Lakeland and Lackawanna Trail for a little while, for about 6 years. And then during that time, I started to cover sports for some local weeklies, just kind of doing roundups and recaps and some player profiles. I even had the opportunity to interview Mike Munchak, former Penn State great, and who went to Scranton Central, and he, of course, is a Hall of Fame player for the Houston Oilers. Got to interview him and do a nice profile for one of the local weekly sports newspapers, and worked my way up to working at the print plant in Scott Township for the Scranton Times. And one day there was an ad hanging on the bulletin board for a sports clerk, someone who would answer the phones and take the box scores and the results of events over the phone to prepare them for the paper. And I saw it, and I applied, and the next thing you know, I got hired in Scranton and started doing that. Did that for about a year and a half, and then got promoted to a sports writer in 1998, and I've been doing it ever since.
Well, so you definitely, you were involved, back in the day, with print media in Northeast. There's several papers, and when we were younger, some of the papers had 2 editions. You know what I mean? Things like that. So
Yep.
It's really changed. You remember the printing presses and all the ink and all the typeset things that happened back in the day. Because I remember very similar kind of thing when I was in college. I did some writing for the Citizen's Voice. So trying to learn and remember what those guys who had done that for 25 years and all the little stories you got in the newsroom and stuff. That was fun to kind of sit back and listen, just like when you would listen to coaches at a clinic somewhere. But when you listen to the old sports writer tell their stories, that was always pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun, Vito, because I tell you, it's obviously it's changed dramatically in these recent years. You've seen it. A lot of people have seen it. We're going more digital, and kids are just into the TikToks and Instagram stuff. So we're kind of moving that print model to more of a digital world. And it's a tough change for people. It's a tough change for us old timers. And it's hard to believe I have to put myself in that classification. But, I've been doing this so long you think about the generations you mentioned earlier about the generations of kids who I've covered. If you go back to what the 1998-99 sports year would have been my first full season as a full-time sports writer, I mean, those kids who graduated then are in their 40s now. So,
Yeah, yeah.
it kind of put things into perspective. You never thought it would change so dramatically. You always knew the digital and the internet was going to have a huge impact on how we covered sports locally. But for me now, I'm seeing a whole different aspect of it and a whole different approach to delivering the coverage that I've tried to do over the last 26 plus years. And, it's a tough change for everybody, all the readers, and hopefully they'll, accept us and continue to read and enjoy the stories that we love as a sports staff and I as a sports writer to deliver and tell for the readers.
It's such a double-edged sword because, the digital, the social media, you have that automatic, in a blink, you can get coverage of something that just happened. You can have coverage live. We see a lot of live streaming of things that are going on. So for the consumer, for the sports fan, they can get that up-to-date info right now. But then, for the writer in the journalist who you want to get the story right, especially when you're doing more of an in-depth story on someone, to have the time to go back and read your notes and double check some things and things like that. I mean, that's what's hard. I think that's the balancing of trying to get, all your facts straight when you print something, when you publish something versus getting the story out right now because it's happening right now. That's got to be really challenging for you guys.
It is. And I'll tell you, when I first got into the actual sports writing part of it, I can remember my interview and I had kind of laid out and mapped out a plan where I was kind of going to transition how we delivered sports stories. I wanted to be more of a storyteller and kind of give the readers more in-depth life type profiles, influenced a lot by my private life, which I wish had been told more to an audience for reasons that we don't have to get into, but I would have liked somebody to have maybe asked, how difficult it was playing sports with mom who was battling an illness, whatever. So I kind of went into this profession with the idea that I was going to expand what sports coverage was in the area. I don't know if I've done well at that or not, but I did try to do that. And my favorite stories are always my profile stories. And it just seems, for whatever reason, as we continue to move deeper and deeper into this digital age, the attention spans have kind of grew much shorter. And we've lost that game story type of journalism or sports coverage that, when I would cover a football game, I used to like to tell a story about the game, understanding that what I was writing, I was trying to give a picture of what happened on the field or on the courts, understanding that many of the people who were reading it weren't there. And now you're just doing things so much quicker, and you're just you have to give quick hitting information because, the attention span just isn't there. People can turn to the social media really quickly and find out the final score at any point during the course of the game or after it. So it has become a challenge. And as we as newspaper people are, evolving into this digital age, some of the things that we're doing and the way we're presenting things, it's going to be a challenge also for the readers because they're used to a certain way and that way is gone now,
Mm-hmm. Well, and so much of, the people that we've talked to on the podcast, it's usually somehow connected to either education, sports, or leadership, whether it's leadership in the education world or sports world or business world, doesn't really matter. And several of the people that we've spoken to so far talk about storytelling as a skill they have in the business world, because anytime, you want your message to stick, you attach it to a story. You attach it to a story that has personal, inside personal, something that everyone can kind of be drawn to. And then you tie your universal theme to it, or your message, your vision, whatever it is on the business side of it. And then people remember that little anecdote that they heard somewhere because somebody talked about their grandmother or their mom, being ill when they were, competing in sports, things like that. So it's just, to me, I just love how all these things tie together. So you're coming at it from, the world of being a sports writer, but the exact same skills you're talking about, what you try to do on a daily, people in the business world use to try to sell cars or, to get more clients, things like that. So the essence of storytelling and building relationships is what we talk about on the podcast all the time. And you've already kind of mined into that a little bit. So this is going to be pretty cool. And I think when you talked about 98 and stuff, that's when I was a young head coach up at Delaware Valley back in the day. And that was, for people that don't remember, that's right around when they went from, the old ways of doing things with the smaller leagues and whatnot. And they created that super conference where all the same size schools played each other. And that was a lot of fun for a young head coach and a fledgling football program to go up against some of the, animals that have been around forever, the beasts of the East. I remember going into Abington that year, and it was like the Christians and the Lions, because you go into the pit and they were so good at that time. And at Delaware Valley, we were just kind of starting some stuff, and, crazy time. So those 97, 98 seasons, I think they have some PTSD from back then.
Well, it's funny because you may not remember this, but in 1998, which I believe might have been the first year of that LFC breakdown of 4 divisions, where Delaware Valley was in division with Lackawanna Trail, but you had to play crossover games with the bigger schools because you were a big school enrollment wise, but you were still building your program. I was an assistant coach at Lackawanna Trail that season. So that's probably the first time I had met you in person as you were a football coach. And then of course, not long after you left and went into this principal track that you were on. But listen, people forget it. Delaware Valley needed a lot of work. And that would be the case for any program, regardless of the enrollment. When you start from scratch, which you did in 1992 as a program, and to see what you started, you and your staff, many of the guys who were on your staff stuck around for quite a long time. Your brother is still on the staff there, and of course Keith Bolsomer moved as an assistant to the head coach. It's so far removed from memory, because all that people see now is this powerhouse program that Delaware Valley has become. And look, the seeds were planted by you and your staff back then in 97, 98. So you should take a lot of credit for that. I know you don't, but you should. And, it's just great to see what they've been able to accomplish up there at Delaware Valley.
Well, I think, thanks for the kind words. And one of the things that does, make me proud and make a lot of the guys who are around at the start of that proud is we knew that was going to be there. We knew it was going to take time, because one of the things that we'll talk about is tradition and consistency, and all the programs, whether you talk about, the Valley Views and the Berwicks and, Lakeland, when you have programs where kids play and their dads played and their grandfathers played, that when that starts to happen, and you still have consistency, maybe the coaching staffs and the style of play and things like that, then you have a program. And that's where they're at now. I mean, a lot of those guys who were there at the beginning, and you have kids. Actually, I know a couple of running backs that went through a couple of years ago. I had taught their parents in school. So and now it's that second generation of people that keep playing. So we knew it would be there, and it's really cool to see it happen. And and again, whether it's Wyoming area or it's Berwick back in the day, when you have the same teachers and coaches that keep hanging around and doing the same things consistently and preaching the same kind of positive things, good things happen, and again, I think a thing that you mentioned before, short attention spans, is going to be something that might prevent additional programs in any sport to grow, because people may not have the attention span to give guys chances, to give coaches chances to build something. So we'll talk about that too.
Super.
Moving on to building from what you said a little bit about the change. Now you let's go back in the time machine a little bit. You talked about, leaving high school, going to Lafayette. Was there ever a seed of wanting to be a sports writer or a storyteller when you're in high school? Or did you not see this as a career someday? How does that fit in?
So funny you should ask that, because what I omitted earlier on is that I was one of the first editors-in-chief / sports editor of the Lakeland High School newspaper,
Okay.
the Lakeland Lance. So that's really where it started for me. And then when I went to college, Lafayette didn't have a journalism degree that you could earn. I went to Lafayette to play football, obviously, and I did so because they paid for the tuition.
Sure.
But there, while a student at Lafayette, the best classes that I had were my freshman year, where it was English 101 and English 102. I had two great professors there, but the one who really influenced me a lot was Professor Michael Robertson. I'm not even so sure he's still at Lafayette. I'm sure he's moved on. I graduated so long ago, but he used to have part of his course there was developing storytelling techniques. And that's really where I picked up on it. That's where I started it. Coincidentally, that year, my freshman year, my two best grades came in English 101 and English 102. Because of that, my ability to do that or learn and develop how to do storytelling. So it changed a little bit. You have to kind of adapt to what storytelling is. In newsprint, you have only limited space. Back then, I could write very, very long stories in college, and my editors today would probably tell you I write too long as it is, but I do enjoy that aspect of it, the storytelling, and that's really where it started. And the sports writing part of it really started early on in my career because I started doing that at the high school as part of my senior year, working on the student newspaper. And then it really, my interest developed because of, believe it or not, because there aren't that many around anymore, is contributing to the weeklies, because weeklies their technique was, they're not giving you immediate results, the next day results. They're giving you more a roundup type of thing. And that's really where you see a lot of profiles done on athletes.
Yep.
In those weeklies. And that's where I got used to doing that. I believe there was I want to make sure I have the name of the publication right, because it was really a lot of fun. It was out of Wilkes-Barre, the Sports Bulletin. That was the one where they kind of started like a Lackawanna County page, and they allowed me to do a lot of the profiles and season previews and those sorts of things. So those were the things I really enjoyed to do then, and I still enjoy to do them now. How many times I get to do them these days are few and far between, but we're going to keep trying the best we can and give people insight into the lives of these young athletes who are on the fields that you really kind of just see in uniforms every week. So we're going to keep fighting the good fight.
Well, I tell you, everybody, that I talk to really is kind of, understands how things are changing and evolving and whatnot, but, is really kind of sad that some of the old ways of covering things is going by the wayside, because I remember, and again, we're going to date ourselves when we talk about these things, but, growing up in Wilkes-Barre, and Ashley, Newtown really, but, going to Bishop Hoban out of Wilkes-Barre, and you would see, that Monday morning quarterback kind of thing. There was a guy, I think it might have been Neil Corbett who actually did it, but or I could be wrong. I'll give the wrong props to somebody, but it was called Son of Rapper. And they would have their predictions of how, all the games every week. And on Mondays, they would talk about what happened, and they would always tie in little anecdotes about things, whether it was the coaches or, players' family things, very similar to what you're talking about up in Lackawanna. And that's what everybody talked about. When we went to school, you talked about what was in the paper, and, your dad at the dinner table was talking about, can you believe he wrote this? Or like, so that kind of, the water cooler conversations, the dinner table conversations, things like that, it's all gone because no one, and you had to wait for them, you knew that was going to happen on a Thursday. There was going to be all the picks and the previews and whatnot. And so, and now that everything's immediate, people still talk about it and people tweet and retweet and do that kind of stuff, firing stuff back and forth, but that you have that collective audience at the same time all the time. And I think that's for us old timers, I think it's a little sad that that's gone away.
Yeah. And, it's going to continue to go in that direction because the Scranton Times Tribune and the Citizens Voice, of course, as everyone knows, the publications were sold to MNG, which is a digital company. And so, yeah, that's changing. And really, those newspapers were part of a dying medium,
Yep.
if you know what I'm saying there, because realistically across the state and really across the country, the daily newspapers they're all going out of business. It's just not a strong business model anymore. And you really have to try and take advantage of this generation's, commitment to being and getting information online. And it's a challenge because for so long, people just expect to be able to go on the internet and get everything for free. And no one can ever kind of put the parallel. Well, you used to subscribe to the newspaper. You paid a subscription for the newspaper. Why shouldn't you pay for a subscription online?
Someone's got to pay for it. Yeah.
Somebody has to. Well, they don't. People, because the internet is such mostly a free entity,
Mm-hmm.
people can't put those two and two together. So that's one of the uphill battles that we as newspaper people are trying to continue to fight through. And, the audiences are building, which is good. The online traffic is good. And you can do a little bit more. Again, you have a lot more space online. You can write a little bit longer, which I like to do, and not necessarily a good thing, but it's fun to do it that way. And, you can do some fun stuff with video and everything. I've kind of gotten into that mode a little bit more. And, so you have to evolve. And look, I'm not going to be in the business forever. So you have to adapt or you have to move on. I'm not ready to move on just yet.
Well, and I think, from the educational side of it, what we're seeing too, with so much online and digital, kids are kids. They're going to do things and circumvent rules. So every time you think you're going to stop them from being on their phones or doing this, doing that, they're going to find ways just like we did when we were in school. But one of the positive things that I see is, digital resumes, for lack of a better word, whether, when kids get their LinkedIn profile and they could, put all everything they've done and the courses they've taken, the credentials they've gotten, they could put videos and they put all that together. So now when they're going for, school or a job, they're just, this is my LinkedIn, and that's just one avenue and everything's there. It's a digital portfolio. It's a digital resume that kind of helps them build their brand. And that's what we're seeing in education, where we have to evolve with that, where it's not the way, we can't teach the way we're taught. That's kind of a mantra we always talk about in education.
Yep.
But everything's happening so quickly that those of us who are supposed to be in charge of these things really almost defer to the students a lot because they're so much better. They're digital natives. But I do think that kind of thing where you still have to have the storytelling skills and you have to understand, the beginning, middle, and end of story and what makes a good narrative and all of that. But every student and student athlete is going to benefit from learning those skills, because they're going to want to promote themselves and build their brand. And, hey, everything's about social influencing and how many followers you have and all that stuff, things like that. But in essence, if your story is entertaining, you're going to have the influence, you're going to have the followers. So I think what's kind of neat is some of the tools that you have in your toolbox. Every person, in the digital age needs to know a little bit to be good at it. So you guys might feel that you're at the end of something, but you might be the ones at the tip of the spear when it comes to digital narratives. What do you think about that?
Well, I hope you're right with that. That made me feel a lot better. That's a heck of a pep talk. You can tell you were a head coach.
Well, I see it every day, and so much of, whether, we're going to go down the rabbit hole of NIL and things like that later, but so much of that, I like the one thing that I do like the whole concept of branding does, it helps to build students' confidence. They have to be able to promote themselves and kind of stand up and say, hey, look at what I've done. And it's hard for introverted kids and quiet kids to do that, stand at the beginning of a classroom and, give a speech, all of that. We've all gone through it. But if they can do it digitally and then stand behind it and make little videos where they're taught, whatever it is, but they're kind of standing on their own and saying, hey, I've done some cool things. I'm different than this other person. This is how I stand out. Here, take a look at me. So from that angle, I think it's a neat thing. I don't know a lot about that, but that's the area I try to always look at the positive side. There's a million and one negative things about all this stuff, but I'm trying to find the positive ways to use it. So that's an area that, we're looking to kind of grow.
Yeah. Well, you have to find the positives because it's not going away.
No, not at all.
You got to find the positives and find the positive ways that you can use it to benefit others or yourself and just do the best you can. That's what we try to do day to day, get better every day. You know that.
Now, you talked about, all the people that you've covered and the different stories. And programs, things like that. What could you tell us? I mean, you've covered, fledgling programs that are just beginning or have had some tough years and down seasons, things like that. And you've covered athletes that played in programs that were traditionally, powerhouses.
Mm-hmm.
Could you identify characteristics that you saw common across all successful programs in any sport? It could be wrestling, football, basketball. Were there any common threads that you saw in those kind of things?
Well, I don't want to give too much away, but it's a topic that's going to be addressed a little bit in my preseason football guide.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So I do a project every year, and motion here on your podcast is that the Game Face 2024, which will be available in the Times Tribune on Sunday. I believe it's the right before the first week of the season. So the first week of the season this year is August 23rd and 24th. So it would be that Sunday before that. And, it's usually, I do a project for it every year. And this year I chose to look at that topic, tradition, and see what some of the common threads are and what the kids, how they buy into tradition. And, look, I graduated in 1988. You graduated in 1988 from Bishop Hoban. We are truthfully far forgotten, whether we believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
The generations I can remember when I was growing up and as a Lakeland fan and a Lakeland player, it was all about tradition. That's what fueled our program in the 80s was the great success that Lakeland had in the Suburban Football Conference in the 1970s. And I can remember I moved here from out of the area. My mom and dad are from the area, Northeast Pennsylvania. So we moved back here when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I just can remember the tradition of Lakeland football just starting then. It was in the late 70s, mid to late 70s in the Suburban Football Conference, which has long been gone. And I can remember a lot of my first influences, which was something I didn't see back where I used to live. There were just a lot of signs in people's yards, banners, stripped across the telephone or power lines, and just the celebrating of the Lakeland football team back then. And I believe they had a stretch there where they won 8 championship seasons in a row. They had got the championship in 8 seasons in a row, which bridged over when Lakeland moved to the Big 11. And I can remember, I'll tell you a funny story. In 1980, when Lakeland played Valley View, it was a big rivalry. It was the last game of the regular season in the Big 11 schedule. And Valley View at the time was 10-0-1, and Lakeland would be 10-1. And the winner would be the Big 11 champion and went on to represent the Eastern Conference in the playoffs in Class A. And my father, my brother, and myself went to the game at 9 o'clock in the morning for a 1:30 kickoff. And I'll tell you that the place was sold out at 9:30 in the morning. It was incredible the amount of people that were at that game. And that's how I kind of got into sports and tradition. That's what influenced me as a player, as a football player. And then, of course, in track, Lakeland's track program has always been among the best. And so there was a long winning streak there involved. And, you didn't want to be the one on the team that ended that streak. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure, yeah.
So that tradition drove me as an athlete in track and field. So, yeah, I do see some common things as I'm covering these teams. And again, you'll see more about what I'm talking about in that preseason guide. But, you have right now, I'll just give you a small example. You mentioned Valley View earlier, but Scranton Prep right now is kind of in an incredible run of success over the last 10 to 12 years, which kind of started when Nick Donato became the head football coach there, and the enrollment grew a little bit, and they started to give by this having success on the football field, started to draw some talent there to that school. And, then of course you have in basketball Abington Heights with Coach Ken Bianchi, and he and assistant coach Jeff McClain won 900 games in their careers. And the consistency of Abington Heights. If you went to an Abington Heights game in 1998, when this really all started to blossom, and you went again last season, it's just kids playing hard, being fundamentally sound, and feeding off of that tradition of the banner that's in that gymnasium where they practice day in and day out with all of those championship seasons on there. And it's a motivation for these kids that they listen to the coaches. You have to have stability in your coach, maybe not necessarily the entire staff, but you have to have a core group. If you think back to Valley View in the 70s and 80s, Frank Pizzalia was there for so long, and his right hand man was Tom Krimpaski, and Nick Rodeo was the line coach, and Bob Grandinetti. They were there for 20 years, 30 years together as a staff. And so the players and the kids who come through, it's not like the pros where you have kids players going 10, 11, 12 years in a team or whatever. You only get them for 3 years at a time. So you need those kids to have that consistency of the coaching staff being there and that system being there. What I mean by a system that sometimes gets lost a little bit by coaches in sports today is it's not necessarily the execution of plays. It's a system of, okay, we're going to teach blocking first. We're going to teach tackling second. We're going to teach running with the football in the correct hand, those types of fundamentals. And sticking to that as your base first, then developing your system. And that's what I see breeds the most success in these programs is the combination of the tradition and stability in your coaches or in your coaching staffs. That really is what breeds success on the high school level.
And that idea of, fundamentals, I mean, for people that aren't aware, or I'm sure people listening to us talk about sports or sports fans, John Wooden and his pyramid of success. I mean, you listen to, the generations of great basketball players and coaches that were influenced by him. And he would talk about, I remember, I don't know if it was Bill Walton or Kareem, somebody talked the first day of practice. He talked about how to lace up your sneakers, and he did that all the time with everybody. And so it didn't matter, if you were a 5-star, as we refer to kids today, or whoever you were, when you came in, you're going to do the fundamentals the way Coach Wooden taught the fundamentals, and then we'll build from there. So those things are so common across everything. And then you hinted on, you didn't use the word, but I'll say culture. I mean, I think it's that system.
Oh yeah.
It's the people that are together that build that through the tradition and through the expectations and the way they go about their business. They build this culture, and then there could be some pieces that leave, coaches here or there, players and whatnot. But once that's rolling, once it becomes a thing itself, once that culture is actually a living, breathing thing, that's what sustains success. But the question I'll ask you is, and just as a personal thing, is that something you can fake? I mean, because if it was easy to build a positive culture, every person would do it in every field, business, sport, whatever. But it just seems like it's almost like lightning in a bottle in certain areas. It works in certain areas, doesn't work in other areas. So what do you think about it? Is it organic that it just happened because these people are there at the right time and they build on that? What do you think? What does it take to build that culture and to sustain it?
Well, one of the parts of the equation that I inadvertently left out is you have to have some talent too.
Oh, yeah, the Jimmies and Joes. You need the Jimmies and Joes.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So yeah, you can have the best, you can have the best game plan laid out, as and still get beat, and sometimes, no matter what it happens a little bit more frequently now where it seems like the same programs win year after year after year, but was a long time. It's just so difficult because you do have to have the talent as well.
Yeah.
So it is something you cannot fake, however. You can't, as a high school coach, and I'm not saying that I know any more than anybody else, and I've been out of coaching for a very long time, but I just think you have to have a commitment to to teaching the fundamentals first. And sometimes it's hard because of the time frame. You're only with these teams and these kids for a short period of time. And with the way that, practice restrictions are now, it's very difficult. But I think you have to start there first. You can never get too far ahead of yourself in that regard. And what I mean by that is don't game plan for week one until your players know how to come out of a stance. And I think that's an important thing that coaches need to continue to strive to do. So, and I truly believe this next generation of coaches believes that. Now they are facing much more daunting challenges than coaches of generations past with what has now been developed with these private, trainers and private coaches and of course travel, sports. It's just a challenge. Everybody wants to play rather than practice and work hard, and that's just human nature. I didn't want to practice. I'm sure you didn't want to practice. So that's nothing new. I just think now kids have so many other opportunities to compete that it's hard to say, listen, I'm going to take the time to learn the fundamentals that while they'll be beneficial to me now or in the long run, I need to do what is going to benefit me right now in the immediacy of right now. So that's part of the challenges I see with developing consistent winning football, basketball, baseball, softball programs is you have to have that commitment to the fundamentals first and then never get too far ahead of yourself.
And it's like two things that are completely opposite butting heads, where you have the individual training and the travel team kind of thing going on, which is a necessary evil, like I've said on this podcast before. I understand that. But at the same time, when you look at team building as opposed to individual skill sets, they conflict a little bit sometimes, because if you're off, playing travel with a bunch of other great athletes that aren't from your area, but you're competing at a high level throughout the year, whenever it is, you're getting yourself better, and hopefully you'll bring that skill set back to that high school team that you're on, and that will kind of improve there. But when it kind of fast forward to when they're old, like we are, when you get back together with the guys, you talk about the things, the wins and losses. I mean, sometimes the stories you have when you went through terrible seasons is just as entertaining and just as fun, because you went through all that adversity and you persevered. But they're the stories you're going to talk about when you come home and see people on Wednesday before Thanksgiving, things like that. Not so much maybe the guy that you played with, from Downingtown that was on your travel team. You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like some of that collective, whatever it is that make the bonds that are built in athletic competition, I hope that doesn't go away because people aren't building the bonds because they're kind of off on their own little individual vision quest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I also, I don't see, hopefully it doesn't happen in my time frame, because listen, I can still, when you talk interesting times of my year, my coverage year is when I cover the Dream Game in the summer, because that is a collection of graduated players, many of whom will not play ever again.
Yep.
And they always talk about the memories of no matter what their record was, and that's, I don't think that aspect will ever go away. I hope. I am worried about the future of high school athletics because we've put such an emphasis on winning state championships and competing for state championships.
Yep.
I think it's just very, very difficult for the public school system to succeed consistently. And so then that opens up a whole nother Pandora's box, and certainly another room for a discussion. But I just, because you see it yourself as an administrator, athletic participation is down across the board. It doesn't matter what sport it is in high school athletics. So that concerns me a little bit. I'd like to see more kids involved in scholastic activities and sports, obviously, because that's my profession. I earn a living that way, covering. So I want to see them succeed. And schools, as you know, struggle to even field programs in this modern time. So yeah, you never can match that team bonding experience of a high school sports team. And hopefully that'll never go away.
Well, and to expand on that, and I don't have the hard numbers in front of me. It's more of a feel. I definitely know it's reality because I've been in education 30 years. Connected students perform better. Connected students come to school more. Connected students make more positive choices. And it doesn't matter if you're on a sports team or if you're in the band, if you're playing esports now, if you're, in the chorus, whatever, if you're connected to something or another group of people that are also wearing the same school colors and things like that, you have a reason, you're invested in something. So I agree 100%. I mean, there's such a correlation between being involved in something and how you're going to do what kind of, or academic career you're going to have. And to see, and it's down across the board and everything. I mean, sports are down. We're always trying to do more inventive things to get kids involved in more clubs and groups, things like that, because you see it. The ones who aren't involved, they find the reasons to not come to school, to not really care about their grades and blah, blah, blah. And that's a whole other, we could talk about that a different day, but you brought up the dream game, and a question I have, and this is probably definitely consistency of the leadership there. I played in the Unico game in 1988, the Miami Valley Con, and the Unico game and the dream game do not have the same tradition. I mean, and I think part of it is maybe just the vision of what the dream game seems like it's been very consistent on how they do it, when they do it. And the Unico game, the date has changed so many times over the years. It was in June. Then they moved it around to have it around Thanksgiving to try to get people to come back for the old Thanksgiving game mentality. But that's gone. That ship has sailed. You're not going to get that back. And so they can't find where it works, but the dream game is, I guess I don't know enough about it. You would know because you've covered it and for so long. They've played that at the same time consistently, correct?
Well, it used to be a fall, but when I say used to be a fall game, that was 1957.
Sure.
So
yeah,
since 1958, I think it's been a summer game, and it used to be in August, and then they had to adjust. I mean, just like anything else.
Yeah.
You have to adjust to try to keep the interest, because when they were playing in August again, back then in our time, kids weren't reporting to colleges till the following week.
Yep.
Now, if you're playing football in college, no matter what level you're at, you're reporting much earlier. Mm-hmm. So the dream game did adapt a little bit and move to that. Now it's consistently that third Wednesday in July. And it really goes back to that word in that topic that we discussed a little bit earlier. It's all about tradition. And I can tell you this from my own personal experience of playing in the dream game. I didn't know if I was going to be allowed to play in the dream game because I was going to Lafayette, and practice started, I think, the Monday after the game, which was a Wednesday game in August of 1988. And of course, Lafayette encouraged me to play, so I did. And you just get to make such great friends from other teams, guys who you were, enemies of, or guys who were your opponents. And look, I have a lot of these friendships still to this day. Mondo Salavanti down in Old Forge, Dr. Salavanti now, he was a teammate of mine in the dream game. He and I talk on the sidelines all the time about playing in that dream game. We got our butts kicked. So we still, a lot of the guys from Valley View who I played with. And if you remember back, Valley View Lakeland was a very fierce rivalry, and you made those types of friendships. I still stay in contact with guys from that group, Rigo Vangarelli, and guys from Abington Heights. And it's just a special time for you to kind of bond with people from different school districts, and you get to become friends with them. And the dream game does do it right. It relies a great deal on tradition. Jerry Prosciutti, who is the player liaison, he gives a speech every year. He's very consistent with it. He reminds all the kids. He first asks them if anyone here at the game playing, members of the roster, had any relatives, dads, grandparents. No, we're at the grandparents level already, who may have played in the dream game. And without fail, there could be a dozen to 24 hands, raised. Mm-hmm. The people that had that kind of, connection to the dream game. And they keep the same jerseys every year. The county's in red, the city is in white. And, it just has that kind of a real tradition feel to it. And the kids buy into it and they love it. The organizers do a great job with it. And that's where the success comes in. And they got 7,000 people to the game again this year.
Yeah.
The fans,
they love it.
The fans come out for it. Yep. Yeah, they love it.
And it's a great venue. I mean, they're at Valley View Stadium there, and it's a great place to see a game, and it's the consistency there. And talk about like reflection. I remember being a young head coach back in the 90s and listening to Mr. Prosciutti talk at a clinic or something, and having that young thought I knew everything kind of mindset back then, when he would say things and honestly give off an aura that he would rather see the Suburban and the Big 11 be around forever in the Heckwood State playoffs, which at that time I thought, this old guy, what is he talking about? And now fast forward all these years later, I go back and look, and when we played in high school, and there was an 11-week season with a bye week. So every kid who played high school football in Northeast PA played for 12 weeks, because regardless of if you didn't make the playoffs or if you didn't go Eastern Conference, you had more opportunity, and you had 2 weeks prior to that, you had 2 scrimmages, right? So you had all those opportunities to compete and to build those bonds with your teammates and things. So maybe he was on to something, like back when he was saying that. And because when you whittle it down, even with 6 classifications, there's a small percentage of teams that are still playing in December. You know what I mean? So now, teams are only playing the 1 scrimmage. You have the smaller actual season. So, I kind of hear what he was saying. I guess there was wisdom there that I didn't see as a 20-something-year-old coach.
Well, again, it's like anything else. Development, the evolution of, forever the Eastern Conference was the marquee trophy yet.
Yep.
And start dangling that fruit of a state championship, quote unquote, because realistically now we have 6 classifications, but that when it first started, it was 4. I mean, are you really a state champion, or so in football, there was so many people that fought against that, because I'm more in the camp, the high school football season be 11 weeks of football. And then if you wanted to go into classifications, play maybe 1 week or 2 weeks after. I mean, I played 13 games my senior year. We played, into the last week of November. And, that's a lot of football. But because of the commitment it takes to play football, I always thought 10 weeks was never enough. Even if it was an 11th week with a playoff game, it still just didn't seem like enough of a reward for the commitment a high school player has to make. And I was never always a fan of the state playoff system. I just don't think there's a right way to do it for football. For whatever reason, it just sat with maybe because I played at a small school and our schedule pretty much was all big schools, and we didn't even think about that back then. I understand the circumstances behind high school athletics have changed with enrollment sizes, but when I played at Lakeland in 1987, again, archaic, I get it. We were a Class 2A enrollment, and in order to win the Eastern Conference Championship, we had to beat Williamsport in the semifinal, which at the time was one of the biggest schools in the state, and we had to beat Tunkhannock, which again would be a 4A type school in enrollment. But we never thought of that. We just played. We were a good football team. We thought if we wanted to be champions, we had to beat the best, and no matter what the team was, and that's what we did. So I've always felt that Eastern Conference format had it right. But again, when you start dangling the idea and the notion of winning a state championship, obviously they had to go to this model. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the 6 classifications. It does give a lot more schools and teams the ability and the opportunity to compete for a state championship. But that just brought other problems with it. You know what's coming next, the private versus public, and that argument raises its ugly head every year, no matter what the sport. That argument has now been passed down to even sports you don't even think it would be a factor, but of course it is. Volleyball and even track and field. Now track and field an individual sport. They're talking about the public versus the private. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is where we're at now. So yeah, I loved the old, like you're saying, the old football stories, the old football traditions, but everything has to kind of evolve and satisfy what brings out the fan. You're going to be a state champion. So every state does it. No. So we might as well do it too.
Yeah, we have to begrudgingly, trudge forward into the future. Yeah. That's where we're at as the old heads. Now, we talked about some glory day stuff and things like that, but whether it's somebody that you played for or was around when you were in your playing days or when you were in college, things like that, who would you say was, you don't have to pick one guy, maybe a couple, but one of the greatest coaches that you were either coached by or that you got to know, talking to? If was there a top 2 or 3 that you could think of?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, my track coach at Lakeland, Phil Ticelli, is the best track and field coach, bar none. And you could argue with whoever is having the most recent success or had success before him. What he did at such a small school like Lakeland is just an incredible accomplishment. And he had such a great personality and he had a great rapport with the kids. Certainly when I was an athlete there, he was very active. He was very, determined to help you as an athlete, as an individual, but also as a team. He wanted to make sure you never lost sight of the fact in track and field that it was, in addition to being an individual quest, it was how can you as an individual help the team succeed and build a program and build a tradition, which we've talked about a lot here today. But so, yeah, he was a great influence on me. I coached with him and I learned so much from him and the little nuances. Like anybody else as a young coach, I thought I knew a lot more than I did, and I needed some direction at times, and he would pull me aside and remind me that, hey, he'd been doing it a lot longer. This is going to work better. And, I would kind of mold my philosophies in with his much wiser philosophies. And he's still involved in track and field since his retirement. And he's been so well respected in the entire district and the state for that matter. I just couldn't never thank him enough for what he taught me. And I had the great fortune of being coached by Dan Case at Lakeland, what would be the longevity to his career that many of the other greats who are more, widely known or more easily remembered as the best coaches, Jack Henses, Frank Pizzalia. No one often puts Dan Case in that category, but he was just a terrific football coach, but really a greater man. He just kind of taught us so much about discipline. I know I probably have failed him in his teachings, but it was a great influence that he had on me, and he was a great coach. And even today, I do tend to, sometimes when we get together, some of the old players, and we talk about, boy, we wish Coach Case wasn't such a nice guy because we really could have put up some, outstanding individual numbers if he had just kept us in games. And he never allowed us to put the individual accomplishments ahead of the team goals. And he always would remind us that, those team achievements were going to be what we were remembered most. And that was always the ultimate goal. So he just had a great influence on me as well. So I was very lucky to be coached by both of those men. And I would mention, it would be remiss for me not to mention my dad and my mom, who were always so very supportive. My dad was really into, kind of inspiring me in ways only a father could. I'm sure that's the way with a lot of kids today, whether they're a female athlete or a male athlete. Their moms and dads can be very inspiring in a lot of ways. And my dad knew just the right buttons to push at the right time. So I owe a lot to him as well for what were just great memories that I made as an athlete.
And so much of what you're saying about those people has been echoed, with other guests on the show, whether it's coaches or business leaders or teachers. It all comes down to basically how they made you feel. I mean, yes, they were good and they knew what they were talking about. They knew their content area in the classroom. They knew their X's and O's as a coach, but they had that way to motivate you. Like you mentioned about your dad, about pushing the right buttons the right way. So in that where, comes full circle to relationships. And I always go back and forth is, teaching and coaching, is that science or is that an art? And I do think it's both. I mean, I think you have to have the science, you have the knowledge behind what you're talking about, but there's an art, there's nuance to how to communicate, certain people that you push, other people that you might have to coddle a little bit. And you can't just sit there and do everything the same way. You're not going to have success. And then when you talk about, Coach Case being a great coach, but a better man, you see up and down college sports, pro sports, where there might be individuals who are very successful, but they don't last long because maybe they're making some other choices outside of the coaching world that aren't the greatest, or maybe even the way they do things to succeed right now doesn't stick. And they don't last and I think it has to do with that kind of the person they are versus the coach they are. Sometimes they both aren't the same thing. So I always, when we talk to our guests and seeing how those things all commingle, whether you're a great business leader, you're a great educational leader, whether you're a great athletic coach, or whether you're just a great person in the community, they all have those same characteristics. You know what I mean? And I think if we could bottle that stuff and sell it, we could retire early and be wealthy, but I don't know if we can do that.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't retire early. That's for sure. I wish I could.
Well, and we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon here, but I want to ask this question. Is there anybody And they do this sometimes in resume or interviews and stuff, like anybody living or dead. But is there anybody, especially Northeast PA, an athlete or a coach, something that you never got a chance to interview that you would love to do like a background story on that you didn't get a chance to yet?
That I don't know.
I mean,
Repeat that question for me.
Anybody, someone who you did not interview that you would love to interview. That you wish you had. Or it could be somebody who's passed away and you can't, but somebody that like is on your Mount Rushmore of like, I wish I got a chance to talk.
That's a great question, because in addition to having the great opportunity to compete against the Ismail brothers, I was able to interview them in my professional capacity as a sports writer. They both were great guests on my radio show back when I had that. And so I enjoyed that a lot. And, look, if you played high school sports in Northeast Pennsylvania for the last 26 or 27 years, I have probably interviewed you. So
yeah, that's true.
That's a tough one. It's really strange, because I can't really think off the top of my head who somebody I haven't interviewed that I maybe would have loved to. Now, if you're talking somebody outside of maybe Northeast Pennsylvania, I would have loved to have had a sit down conversation with someone like a Michael Jordan, just to kind of find out that determination and that drive to succeed that he had. You have to remember, he was so, you just want to kind of figure out, and I did enjoy the documentary about him. I believe it was on Netflix, The Last Ride, or
The Last Dance. Last
Dance, that's what it was. Yeah, just to hear his insight of what his inner drive was, and you'd love to be able to bottle that and kind of. I encourage anybody to watch just what he did, and as that. And of course, my favorite player, like you may not remember, is Eric Dickerson. I loved to watch him play. He was the big time running back in the 80s when I was growing up, and I wore number 19 as a freshman football player at Lakeland for Eric Dickerson. So yeah, those are the types of guys you would love to, would have loved to interviewed at that type of person or that type of athlete for sure. But boy, how lucky have I been, right? I got to interview Jerry McNamara. I got to interview Chris Snee. I got to interview the Ishmael brothers. I've just been a lucky guy. I'm very close to the McCarthy brothers, who are in Major League Baseball.
Yep.
I've just been a lucky guy. And look, I thank all of my family and my supporters who've helped me develop this and have this relationship with so many great athletes in Northeast Pennsylvania. It's just been a great run.
Well, and that's something that I wanted to bring up, because, I've heard this from dozens and dozens of people in and around Northeast PA, just so appreciative of what you do, how you do it, the way that you really take the time, like I said in the intro, to cover, but to celebrate and promote the student athletes in this area. And with all the changes that we've talked about, during the podcast and how things are changing in journalism, I don't know if there will be another Joby Fawcett that could do what you did for so long and so consistently. And it's something that you're well respected in the area, but that. I mean, you're an award-winning journalist, but the guys who are in the trenches and the men and women who are leading programs and leading school districts really appreciate what you do. And I know the kids and the families and things do. So for as long as you're on this ride, keep doing what you're doing, keep being you, because, in an ever changing landscape of sports and the coverage of them, it's needed. Like everyone has a story and every story needs to be told. So for you to take that time to do it the right way, kudos to you, brother, and just keep doing it.
Thank you very much for those kind words. And I can't thank you and, of course, the entire Northeast Pennsylvania sports community, coaches, players, administrators in the schools, everybody that they're the ones that get it done for me or with me. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. So thank you very much for this opportunity. This was a lot of fun today, and I wish you great success with this.
Thank you. And if it's not too bold of me, I'd like to have you on again in the future. We could compare notes maybe at the end of the season, going into another season, see how things are going.
I'm available. You just book it with my people, and we'll try to get that together. You're a good friend, and I've known you for a long time, you and your family. So
yeah,
I wish you the best. I'll try to help out.
My people will talk to your people. We'll set up